Okay.
Hello, hello, hello. Is everybody there? Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Kandira, can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. That's one down. Is anybody else there with me and Kandira? Kandira, looks like we're all alone today. Okay, Danielle. All right, we'll give the others 2 more minutes and then we'll begin. Okay, let us begin. Good afternoon, everybody. As usual, I'll begin by taking my register to see who is with us today. Believe it or not, after today, we have one more session left. I think our time flies. All right, Linnell, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. Alice here.
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Just fine. How was your day?
Long.
Another one of them. Well, if it's any consolation, you are not alone. All right, glad you could make it. I know it is. Chanel, are you there? Chanel, the opposite of Linnell? Not yet. Cindy Newbold, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Ah, there you are. Okay, welcome aboard. Kendra. Kendra Ferguson. Okay, Kendra will be joining us shortly.
So we'll continue. Ready? Talk again, Dira.
I did?
You can't hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes, I'm here. Kendira.
Perfect, Kendra. Wonderful. Okay, Kendra. Danielle.
I am here.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Siobhan.
I'm here.
Perfect, perfect. Muy perfecto. Nikita. Nikita. LaTroy. Guys are out hunting. Kobe. Shari Nixon. Okay, great. Okay. She's here trying to get a mic together. Good stuff. Ginger. Okay. This is Alberta.
Good evening, Mr. Wilkinson.
Good evening, Alberta. Welcome aboard. Excellent. And then Janessa, is it? Okay. Great, we have a quorum, so let us just get right into it. One of your colleagues mentioned, I think it was sometime last week, the possibility of my discussing the assignment, that I think your second assignment that is coming up. When is your next assignment due, by the way?
Third assignment is due on the 12th of July. Some of them have issues with the link, Mr. Wilkinson, so they're trying to resolve the link out right now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll just yap around a little bit. Hopefully they can get in soon. But yeah, the issue came up that since the next assignment, assignment number 2, is so close at hand, that they wanted to know if I can bring that discussion up maybe today sometime and say a few things about how you can do a better paper than you did even the last time. For those of you who did great, you want to do it again. And of course, as you probably figured out, each paper has its own unique characteristics. If you did very well on the last paper, doesn't mean that it will carry through with the second paper. You just need to remain consistent and to double your efforts, because now you have a whole new set of questions that require a whole new set of skills in terms of trying to get a second set of good grades. For those of you who did not do as well as you wanted to do, now you got 50 something, even though you passed the course. You folks want more than 50 something sometimes, and that's quite understandable. So maybe perhaps I'll take maybe around 8 o'clock or so. If I'm still talking about something, you can interrupt me and I'll take a few moments to mention a few things with regards to the assignments, some general statements, and then of course you can apply them to your own situation and raise questions about any concerns you might have. I'll be using an assessment form that was provided by the examiners, looking at some of the comments that they made, since generally those comments apply to most, if not all, students, so that you can kind of look at them again, focus on what they're trying to tell us in terms of how to do a better paper, what things to look out for, focus on, and so on. If you have not started your assignment yet, you need to start tonight after class. Do not procrastinate any further. You only have one lousy month left. And to do a great paper for those people in the UK, you really need to take your time to do a good job. Last minute will not be helpful. Even if you're lucky enough to get through, it's going to be a rush job and you're not going to get the best benefit out of it. So I say, if you haven't started yet, start right away, start outlining, start reading, start making notes, start doing your research, and hopefully by the time I'm done discussing the perspectives from the examiner's point of view, that you will have a few more pointers that will help you do an even better paper than you did before. Okay? So please remind me, if I continue to run on after 8 o'clock, just remind me that we want to do that. All right. Any questions so far on any issues? Okay. I see. Okay, Shari Nixon has joined us. Can you hear me, Shari? Sorry, Moxie. Still trying to hook up.
Sherry sent a
Yes, I
note.
can hear you.
You can hear me?
Oh boy.
Shari, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm having mic difficulties here and there, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you very clearly, actually. I see Shari, Moxie. Is it Nixon, Moxie, Moxie, Nixon?
Two different people, sir.
Or two different people? Oh, two Sharis. That's interesting. So you're not sharing Nixon. Were you here last week, Sherry Moxie?
I was not.
Okay, that's what threw me off. Let me just add you to my list. Sherry. Moxie. Okay, perfect.
Mr. Wilkinson, might I just ask, I noticed on the schedule that today is assignment prep. Is that what's taking place today? I'm sorry, I
Well,
missed the beginning.
yeah, that's what I was talking about a few minutes ago. I was planning to do the assignment discussion in our final class, but somebody, one or two persons suggested that maybe it might be a little more helpful to do this class so that those persons who've already started working on their papers can get a jump start in terms of how they should approach the questions. Okay, so we will, somewhere around 8 o'clock, I was saying if I'm still talking or somebody's still talking, please interrupt us so that we can take a little time. I'm particularly going to focus on the examiner's comments from the last session because I think their comments are very important. We have to, if we can understand them, then you can go back and look at your previous paper or look at what you were doing already and say, oh, okay, that's what I'm not doing. And hopefully at the end of the day, those comments will turn out to be a major source of help to you. Plus, of course, any questions you might want to raise about the questions you're responsible for answering and the approach and that sort of thing. Okay. So yeah, welcome aboard, Sherry. You're in the right class today for sure. Kobe, can you hear me yet?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect, perfect. All right, well, let's just get started then. Remember, the way these classes work, you can interrupt me at any time about anything. It doesn't have to be a structured question. You don't have to wait until the class is over and all that kind of stuff. That still applies. So we were looking at quite a number. Remember, we're in the situation room, situation and cases. And so we saw a whole lot of situations over the last 2 or 3 sessions. And I suspect to some extent today would be no different in terms of other situations. Why do we study situations and cases? Because we look at what persons have done in the past, and the assumption is that we will try to avoid making the same mistakes they have made. That's the whole idea with discussing these situations and these cases in the GRC environment, that we will ultimately learn from the mistake of our neighbors and not seek to make the same mistakes again. All right. So I think we had started talking at length last time about cooperatives, if I'm not mistaken. And we were looking at how cooperatives are falling into the financial services sector and the kinds of problems that they're experiencing now that they're in the big leagues, kinds of poor governance decisions that they're making, and some of the things that even cooperatives who used to be the cream of the crop, doing things a certain way, standing out, full of ethics and responsibility, some of them are now falling to the wayside and not carrying out their responsibilities adequately. Okay. And so I think that's kind of where we left off at the bottom of page 306 with our discussion about what's going on in the co-ops. All right, now notice on the very next page, there's a reference to the success story. But in this case, of course, we're not talking about the co-ops. We're talking about our favorite child. Everybody has a phone from Apple. We started to look at the Apple story. I think we all know basically the background about Apple with Steve Jobs. who unfortunately is no longer with us. Um, but Steve made it very clear in his last weeks of life that he'd give up all the billions of dollars that he had if he could only find a cure for his illness, which ultimately took him out. And so, indeed, there are some things in life that money cannot buy. And Steve Jobs from Apple, like so many of us, have found that out and will find that out in due season. But our concern here is the situations that the Apple case is going to put us in. And so we want to take a moment to look at that scenario to see what our beloved Apple is all about. Chanel, are you here yet? Okay. So I'm going to start from the bottom of the list this time. Usually I start from the top like Linnell and says, oh God, me again. But this time I'm going to start from the bottom with Janessa. Janessa, are you there still? Janessa? Janessa, so you're not starting with me today. Okay. We'll come back to Janessa. Alberta.
Hello.
Are you there, Alberta?
Yes, I'm here.
You know what? Before I get to you, Alberta, why don't we pick on Shari Moxie, who's just joining us? She's had a vacation, had fun. Why don't we start with her and then I'll come back to you a little later. How's that?
Great.
Okay, Shari Moxie. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Great. Go to page 307 at the very top, beginning with this success story. And let's see what opens up in the Situation Room today.
Okay, just opening up.
No problem.
Yes, I'm at 307.
Okay, at the top, beginning this success story.
This success story has not been without periods of difficulty for Apple, especially in the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s when Steve Jobs was forced to resign after a boardroom coup. In the period,
Sorry, Shari, did you guys know that he was forced to resign? Did you know that story? No? Just busy using the phone. Yeah, that's interesting. He was a co-founder of Apple, and then some stinky stuff went down, and his own board forced him to resign. How about that? Okay, so let's see what happens in the Situation Room.
in the period of its absence, Apple released many failed products, made unrealistic goals and forecasts, and engaged in inefficient practices such as manufacturing its own projects within the US and creating a complex supply chain that was not reactive to demand. Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1996 and by 1998 had regained control of his company. After all, he was a co-founder. A strategic decision was taken to shut the Apple manufacturing branch and to close factories and warehouses, reducing inventory and becoming more efficient in achieving better product margins. In addition, this enhanced secrecy in a highly competitive market by not revealing any information on new products prior to launch and generating the hype for which Apple is famous. Manufacturing was diverted to subcontractors, keeping costs under strict control and enhancing the speed of turnaround for new or amended products and components. Such is the extent of the subcontracting by Apple that 748 locations have been used in the manufacture of products and components, which has increased the company's direct and indirect employment massively over the past 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Much of Apple's manufacturing is conducted overseas from its US home base, with over 600 manufacturing locations in Asia and 330 of these in mainland China.
Did you guys know that? 330 factories in China and altogether 600 in Asia. Imagine that. So when these phones come back to us, they're not produced in the United States. It's no wonder that China keeps flexing its muscles, because China knows that companies like Apple, US companies, even though that they are the beneficiaries, earning a lot of foreign exchange in US dollars from having these companies in China, and taking advantage of China's, of course, cheap labor, which is fine with the Chinese. They don't care because they abuse their own people as well. But it's interesting that 600 manufacturing locations are in Asia, half of which are in none other than China. My. I wonder, is that good? All right, keep going.
The advantages to Apple are enormous. It has minimized the labor costs, and suppliers have used Apple's access to the Chinese supply chain within a highly developed industrial cluster that have contributed to reducing production costs. It has been estimated that this has reduced the production cost of an iPhone to 47% of the cost of production in the US.
Wow.
These cost reductions have been accompanied by and driven by huge flexibility in the production process. One major subcontractor, Foxconn, maintains dormitories on factory grounds to allow the immediate mobilization of thousands of workers and instant changes to assembly lines in response to changes in production demand. The scale of the contracts offered by Apple influenced massively subcontractors' practices and also their treatment of their workers.
Now, before you go on, Shari, imagine all those thousands of workers in their little compound living there, just waiting for something to happen in their manufacturing firms, living very close, so that when demand changes, supply changes, product changes come up from top management, that they can kick into action almost immediately, which doesn't give the competition any opportunity to steal information, find out what's going on, and by the time they do, the new product is already to market. Very interesting strategy, how they're able to coordinate all this stuff. Mind-boggling, by the way. And if you're wondering, well, what does this have to do with GRC? Well, keep thinking a little bit longer. It has everything to do with GRC. All right, keep going.
The first raising of treatment of workers by Apple subcontractors. In 2006, accounts of visits of 2 iPod factories in China appeared in the media. Poor working conditions, very low wages, and forced overtime were witnessed. The first report was followed by an enormous amount of press coverage and scrutiny by advocacy groups like Fair Labor Association. The result was to place Apple in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Rather than hailed as the US leader in innovation and job creation, Apple was portrayed as being responsible for prime examples of dangers and harm the relentless pursuit of globalization brings.
Mm-hmm.
Examples of the abuses Apple and its subcontractors have been accused of: 1, child labor used by Foxconn at the Yantai facilities. Foxconn admitted to the use of child labor in late 2012. They targeted internships at school students who were below China's legal minimum working age. Schools required students to complete internships at the factories and work on assembly lines in return for the academic credits necessary for graduation. Their pay was $244 a month, with compulsory overtime required until allotted tasks were completed. Foxconn was criticized for not checking the identity documents of the workers, so that some students as young as 14 were working at its factories. The legal minimum age is 16. Foxconn ceased the policy of internships immediately. Apple's response? Apple subsequently uncovered a further 106 cases of child labor in that year after the Foxconn revelations. Many suppliers had recruited underage workers who had forged identity documents, and one labor agency was found to have been conspiring with families to produce these forgeries. To remedy the situation, Apple took steps to ensure its supplier code of conduct was adhered to fully, and to force the labor agency to pay for the underage workers' education and give them an income equal to factory pay while they completed their schooling. Question.
Yes.
How accountable do you think Apple is in these situations? How can it overcome the logistical problems that will come with so many different suppliers?
Thank you, Shari, for that introduction and for bringing Apple on the scene in the case of governance, risk, and compliance. As you can see, every case that we look at, governance, risk, and compliance, rears its ugly head, whether in a positive light or a negative light. We get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you're looking, and if you're not looking, you might still see something. It's really that ugly sometimes, especially this issue about child labor. The question is, was Apple aware of it and complicit and just tried to do something when they were discovered? Or could it be that the Chinese bosses and those who were running the Chinese companies actually implemented this program of child labor, which of course they do even without any American firms anyway, as a normal course. Okay, so is Apple accountable? Anyone? Is Apple accountable for this situation? Is that a yes? Opinion. Was Apple responsible? What are your thoughts in this case? What is this case trying to tell us? What are we supposed to learn from it?
I think they are accountable in some aspects because
Okay.
it's their company and their products being made, but so they should have known what was happening.
Yeah, they should have known. Even though they acted as if they didn't know to a great extent. And then they tried to, I guess, present them with flowers, like an abusive husband beats up his wife and then comes home with flowers, smiling, saying he's sorry about that again, and he won't do it anymore, I suppose, until the next time. Okay. So the education come back and all that stuff is great, bringing the minimum salary, bringing the salary back to what it should be. Okay, that's fine. They apparently were trying to make amends, but it doesn't change the fact that the perception of the evil that was going on was still there. And so they had to try and clean up their house as quickly as possible, paying for education and bringing salaries up to what they should be. Okay. I suppose that perhaps better than nothing, but it does not change the problems associated with that kind of behavior, particularly when it comes to child labor. Okay? All right. The other problem Apple had was looking at logistical problems in terms of who its suppliers will be. Do they have too many, too little? Is it confusing? What kind of losses are they suffering in the process? What kind of risk they create for themselves when they have so many suppliers providing product? What is the risk that suppliers may have GRC issues? What is the risk that some of the products might be faulty? And this list goes on and on. It's interesting that most of the phones are not referred to as faulty. It is generally felt that the Apple product is top of the line, and so somehow, even with the problems of child labor and logistical problems from trying to coordinate all the different suppliers whom you know nothing about, uh, they have been able to make it work. But I'm sure that this particular case does not explore all the other kinds of potential GRC problems facing the great Apple company. Okay? I noticed the case did not go into the other implications, but I am absolutely certain there were quite a few of them. All right. Janessa, are you there now? Not yet. Okay, Alberta. We're back to Alberta. Can you pick it up? Forces. Alberta, are you there? Okay, Alberta went to have a coffee early. All right. Shari Nixon, are you there? Kidoki. Kobe, can you hear me? Kobe, can you hear me? Kidoki. LaTroy, are you there yet? Oh, I'm not there yet. Okay, Nikita, are you there yet? Okay. Let's see. Siobhan, are you there?
Can you hear me, sir?
Oh yeah, who's that? Kobe?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I absolutely can hear you.
All
So
right.
that means you can just kick in, yeah. Why don't you pick
All
up
right.
for us on page 308?
All right. Forced overtime at Foxconn's Shenzhen plants. In 2010, Foxconn was exposed in the media for overworking employees to the point of suicide. That year, there were 17 attempted suicides reported, of which 13 were successful. These raised the questions of whether working conditions were humane or not, and also resulted in demonstrations against increasing globalization and against Apple in particular. A joint investigation into Foxconn factory conditions was initiated by a conglomerate of 20 universities, 167, and revealed the following.
Yes.
Extreme levels of overtime with 80 to 100 hours a month being cited, whereas the prevailing Chinese labor laws maximum allowed was 36 hours.
Wow.
The speed of the assembly line meant workers were unable to move from one spot because if they did, they could not complete their tasks. 13% of workers had passed out at work. 24% of female workers had reported menstrual disorders caused by stress and excess overtime. There was no ability to raise any grievances as all workers were isolated by the pressure of work.
Now, Kobe, stick a pin. Maybe you guys can read this stuff and move on. And of course, that is the requirement. But of course, my responsibility from a GRC perspective is to say something about these things so that hopefully I can leave something of an impression on your minds as you go about whatever job responsibilities you have. Granted, we in this part of the world don't have these kinds of labor issues, but we do have our version of some of them. They may not be as intense as it is in some of these cases, but if we go to, for example, the hotel industry, maybe to some extent the fishing industry, maybe even some white collar jobs where people put under the gun to produce results and what we know to be unreasonable periods of time to meet certain deadlines that were not realistic in the first place. Okay? So it may not be as intense as this situation, which is really bad. And this was back in 2010. Um, I'm sure that many of these situations still exist. They perhaps find ways to hide them, not tell the truth about what's going on and all this stuff, but I'm certain some of these things are still going on. However, the reason why we're discussing it in terms of Apple, because Apple is an American company. And since Apple is a leading American company, they're expected to set the standard, the GRC standard. They are expected to make sure that the overtime hours meet the requirements of the law, not 80 to 100. That's madness. I don't care how much money you're paying. Okay? Female workers are getting sick because of stress. If you have a gripe, you can't say anything, you shut up. And if you don't shut up, you get sent home. And your little itsy bitsy $224 a month is now no longer yours to feed your family somehow. Okay? People passing out at work. People can't leave to relieve themselves because the assembly line must go on at all costs. Apparently no legal breaks and so on. Total GRC madness. They have violated every single one. The governance level is substandard. The risk is high because of all these kinds of problems. And who the hell is responsible for compliance anyway? Okay? And that's why we keep singing this GRC song, because all around us, whether you are aware of it or not, these GRCs keep tipping one way or the other, right or wrong, sanity or total madness. Okay? So when you get a moment again, you can go ahead and look back at this list. And the next time you feel so terribly unfortunate in your job, ask yourself, do we want any part of this list? And the answer must be no. It's terrible. All right, keep going. Akobi.
Yes, in response to the criticism, Foxconn initiated suicide countermeasures, including suicide nets, no suicide pledges as part of employment contracts, and counselors and monks were made available to provide emotional and spiritual guidance. These measures have not been completely effective, as suicides do still happen, but are more in line with the overall national suicide rates. And the counselors have been criticized for violating individuals' privacy by attempting to pressure workers into informing on each other's conduct violations.
And the question is? What is the question as a result of all of this?
The question is, Foxconn's reaction to the issue of worker suicides appears to have been more of a detection rather than prevention. Does this say anything to you about the culture within this company?
Well, clearly, if you're thinking about risk, you have to be thinking about two types of cultures. So if you're thinking about GRC, you have to be thinking about two types of cultures, risk and compliance. Governance is out the door with this total madness. There are monks trying to keep people from committing suicide. These suicides are no doubt not reported in the local Chinese newspaper, and anybody who opens a trap to try and expose it will face the full brunt of whomever they're going to face, no doubt including the government of China. So this situation has certainly been an eye-opener about human trafficking and child labor and how unfairly people are being treated in the current modern, sophisticated, technological world. Despite all that good stuff, we still find ourselves with these serious, serious GRC violations. It's the whole reason why we study this section so intensely, and the whole reason why we're now in the situation room. So we can go back and see all these cases that we may put aside to try and make some sense of this madness in these jurisdictions. Okay? Most of us don't even know that these things are happening GRC wise. And those who do know, you're so far removed, like so many other persons in the world, it does not matter much. Okay? But certainly for academic purposes, it's very important that you're aware of these things so that if you're confronted in your professional life with any such situation, either directly or indirectly, hopefully you'll do the right thing. All right, keep going, Kobe.
Apple and corporate social responsibility. Despite the considerable challenges of monitoring such a large number of suppliers, Apple has been proactive in addressing working conditions in the factories producing its products. It has a supplier code of conduct. It conducts audits on suppliers and publishes annual supplier responsibility reports on its website. Pressure from Apple has reduced the use of child labor, excessive overtime, and unsafe practices by subcontractors, together with increasing benefits and pay for workers.
Okay.
Areas of improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Worker and management training. Managers and supervisors are trained in management practices, such a worker management communications, such as management communications, anti-harassment policy, and worker protection and safeguarding. Workers are trained on their rights, health, and safety, and the protection offered by local laws. Both management and workers are trained in the Supplier Code of Conduct. Further, professional and personal development programs are also being made available, offering technical, software, management skills, and the ability to obtain higher education qualifications and advanced degrees. Elimination of safety hazards, excessive overtime, and child labor. Apple's Supply Code of Conduct obliges suppliers to provide its workers with proper personal protective equipment, secure emergency exits, and to complete in-house occupational hazard monitoring activities. Attempts have also been made to reduce excessive overtime in factories, and Apple publishes annual compliance with codes of conduct rates. It is interesting to note that the code states a maximum of 60 hours per week, which is considerably more than the EU Working Time Directive, which sets a maximum of 48 hours per week.
Mhm.
Elimination of child labor in subcontractors' factories. Apple is making efforts to eliminate the use of child labor within the entire consumer electronics industry. It has pursued a zero tolerance policy for child labor and ensured that victims are returned to school with compensation for damages to education and lost learnings or lost earnings. Third part oversight. Apple joined the Fair Labor Association, and the findings and recommendations of its audits are available on its website. In association with Verite, it developed the Sustainable Workplace Program to explore practices to promote open communication between workers, suppliers, and Apple to address workers' concerns and implement practices that are found to be most effective across its suppliers. Finally, it joined Initiative Tuzame Handel Electronics Program in 2012, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes sustainable trade in collaboration with the Chinese government and electronics giants such as Dell, Hewlett-Packard, and Philips. The program aims to reduce worker turnover rates and wastage, improve energy efficiency, and facilitate dialogue between workers and managers.
And the question is,
Do you agree that Apple has demonstrated a genuine commitment to CSR through its participation in third-party initiatives, such as those mentioned above? Or do you believe it is window dressing driven by the need to present a caring image to its consumers? What is the justification for your opinion?
okay, so now, based on all that nice gooey stuff that Apple says it has been doing, I'm not saying they haven't been doing it, but the question now is from anyone, what is Apple's intent? Is it good or is it bad based on what you can see? What do you think Apple's intent is by doing all this wonderful stuff? Do they just have money to burn, just to spend for education and upgrades and all this crazy stuff for the workers in the Chinese plants, all 330 of them? Or do they have some other ulterior motive? That is what the question is suggesting.
I personally think that it may be a bit of both, but I
Yeah.
think that if the initiatives that are put in place are genuine, that they would have had an independent entity to see how effective they really are.
Absolutely. Okay. The key word being independent entity. And until it's ready to take on that brave responsibility, then whatever they do, nobody's saying they're not doing some version of it, but it will always be brought into question until somebody can verify, quote unquote, the truth, quote unquote, about what's really going on with Apple and its Chinese factories and all around Asia. The big advantage that they get is because of the very nature of those cultures, information is shrouded and quiet, and so you can get away with garbage, so to speak, if you're doing it. And certainly, who can argue with that huge market that is sitting in China alone, not only for the purchase of consumable goods like phones, but also in terms of the size of the market itself. I mean, before the product is even launched in any other country, just selling Apple phones to the people in Asia alone is mind-boggling. So it makes you wonder why we have a certain kind of relationship going on, they say, between China and the United States. For sure, it's a love-hate relationship, no doubt about that, until you kind of figure out what's going on. All right. So thank you very much for that, Akobe,
No problem.
introducing us to beloved Apple. But now we're a little more aware that apart from its academic purposes, that these products that we use every minute of the day, sometimes they come at a high price, uh, in addition to the phone itself. But the thing is, you hardly ever hear about these things unless you're tuned in or you're in that particular atmosphere or environment. Okay?
Mr.
So,
Wilkinson,
yes.
quick question.
Hmm.
In relation to how this particular example is in the manual, do you think that in answering a question where you want to use an example, that it would be favorable to stick to the examples that are in the manual? Or if you do know of other examples, let's say I know of two similar scenarios of that, I guess, deal with governance in regard to companies like Walmart and Amazon.
Yes.
Would,
Uh,
would,
Go ahead.
would it be favorable to stick to those that are in the manual, or to show, I guess, a wider knowledge by bringing in others that you may know of?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and I thank you for not waiting until we get to our discussion about the examiners and how to approach your paper. Uh, the truth of the matter is, it's always better to have what we call a hybrid situation, where you attempt to use some examples from your text and some examples outside of your text. I would certainly always encourage that. And as you'll see in my discussions a little later and from comments that the examiners have made, we have to make sure, first of all, that we understand what the correct focus is. And then, yes, you do go out wherever possible and find not only from inside of your text, but also from outside in the world, real life examples or cases or situations that you can use as examples. Remember, and I'll probably say it again a little later when we're talking about it, you have to be clear in your answers. One of the things that they gripe about all the time is that some students tend to ramble. Now, nothing's wrong with rambling as long as you're rambling with substantive information that is to the point and actually responding to the question. All right. I'm tempted to say a couple of other things, but I think I'll wait until we talk about the examiner's comments. But yes, that is an absolutely critical question. And yes, you should go out and find examples if you can, along with using one or two examples from your textbook. Always try to use some examples from your textbook or some reference to your textbook or some context from your textbook or some quotation. Always be trying to do that, because whether or not they say directly, oh, we don't mind if you use other sources. No, they don't mind. But I can tell you, I suspect, for what it's worth, these are my words, not theirs, that they will only be flattered if you can find your way into their text to find suitable examples. See, keyword being suitable examples in order to help you answer your question. Absolutely. Okay, good stuff. All right. Who's next? Nikita, are you there yet? Isaacs. Okay. Siobhan, are you there? Siobhan. Okay. Danielle, help Siobhan, are you there? Kobe, are
I
you
am
there?
here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. This is Danielle.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Danielle. Cool. Have you found out yet if you're related to Cindy Newbold, Danielle?
No, sir.
Okay. You never know. They say if he's a Newbold, he's a Newbold. By the way, Danielle, do you know a gentleman by the name of Wari Newbold?
No, sir.
My. I thought every Newbold knew every other Newbold. But that is obviously not true, yes?
Correct.
And that's okay. Maybe there's some Newbolds you don't need to know. They may have some GRC problems.
Maybe.
Absolutely. All right, Danielle, why don't you pick up then where Akobe left off, the contradictions. Now, who would have thought with all that great stuff they were doing that there were any contradictions? Just like in your job, when you go to work tomorrow, it looks like everything is fine. On paper, everybody looks like they're doing the job. Nobody's doing anything untoward. Everybody looks like they're following the rules. But I can assure you, not everybody is. Because there are always contradictions. Okay? And so let's see, in the case of the great and beloved Apple, what those contradictions are, if any. Okay. Danielle?
Apple's supply chain, however, is still far from completely solving all of its workers' rights issues. Critic points out that many of Apple's suppliers still employ workers under sweatshop conditions. Suicides by Foxconn factory workers continue to be a problem, with one occurring as recently as May 2013. Some even argue that given Apple's enormous profit margins, the actions that the company has taken to these issues are very minimal, done
Wow.
only to improve public relations. Examples and analysis of some of Apple's failings at addressing the labor issues it faces and recommendation on what the company should do moving forward include FLA and conflict of interest. Although Apple maintains that it joined the FLA to introduce third-party monitoring to its subcontractors and increase transparency, critics argue that the FLA did little to improve working conditions in these subcontractors. In these subcontractors, and that Apple's membership merely serves as window dressing to maintain its corporate image.
Yes, window dressing again. Keep going.
The Economic Policy Institute pointed out that while the FLA's report praised Foxconn for its progress in improving conditions for workers, many of the changes were insignificant, ineffective, or temporary.
Wow. Keep going.
For example, as part of its action plan, the FLA required Foxconn to increase the number of workers in a union leadership committee to at least 3, but did not specify any requirements for the ratio of workers to management within the committee and how the workers were elected. The committee was amended to consist of 3 workers and 29 managers, and the way the committee operated did not change from how it was before the addition of the workers. The EPI also commented that the FLA's audits were conducted during June and July of 2012 when production demands were relatively low, and the FLA deliberately chose this period to hide the sweatshop conditions of Foxconn factories. By August and September of that year, production had increased significantly to meet the demand for Apple's new iPhone 5 when reports of new instances of abuse and labor rights violation by Foxconn began to appear.
Hmm.
Secretive practices and lack of transparency. One area in need of significant improvement before Apple can eliminate labor rights abuses by its subcontractors is the level of transparency. Apple is renowned for keeping information on its products and services secret, both to public and within its own corporate structure until the day of official launch or announcement, and takes extraordinary measures in doing so. This has led to Apple becoming an overall opaque corporation.
Does anybody know what the mean opaque means?
Cannot see through.
Yeah, unable to see through. They have a veil so that nobody can see from the outside what's going on the inside. Like some families in the Bahamas and around the world, they are opaque. Opaque. We cannot see some of the terrible things that are going on behind the scenes. Many corporations, some of the companies you work for, are also even government departments, are all guilty of this kind of GRC practice. Okay? This is not unique to Apple and our Royal Bank of Scotland and the credit co-ops that went astray and all this kind of stuff. This is everywhere. Remember? Everywhere. All right, keep going.
According to Transparency International, Apple ranks as the 103rd least transparent company among the 24 most valuable multinational corporations in its Transparency in Corporate Reporting Index, which was published in November of 2014. Many of Apple's secretive practices involve its suppliers as well. Often the factory campuses of where Apple products are made are gated off and do not allow entry to the public. Security guards and local police are employed to prevent trespassing at these facilities, and factory workers are required to sign confidentiality agreements and live in dormitories within the factory campuses.
My.
This high level of secrecy makes it difficult for outsiders, including third-party whistleblowers, to become aware of the conditions within Apple's suppliers' factories, allowing violation of workers' rights to go on completely unnoticed. If Apple is serious about becoming a socially responsible corporation, it must end its secretive practices that prevent the public from observing its business practices and the working conditions within its suppliers' factories. More public access to Apple and its suppliers' facilities should be permitted. Terms within their confidentiality agreements should be loosened, and more detail should be included in Apple's supplier responsibility progress reports.
Thank you very much, Danielle, for that mouthful already. As you know, I'll be back. Let me just say this. There's some key words that came up in her discussions, words like opaque or opaque or opaque. However we say it, it means there's a veil somewhere. And usually that veil is designed to hide things. Some of you may well be aware of people in your organization who are hiding things for some reason. Whenever you see that kind of suspicious kind of behavior, this covering up of stuff, it does raise the question about the level of GRC. where it is on the percentage scale. Is it 100%, 70, 50, 30, 10, non-existent? Because based on this example and many others that we've seen, there's no question that hanky-pankying continues. This was only a few short years ago, and I have no doubt that much or many of these things are still happening. Okay? And happening under the signing of confidentiality agreements, happening under the understanding that if you report it, you blow the whistle, this job will be no more that you have. Okay? We take your $224 a month from you as well and tell you get the hell out. We have another 300 million people waiting for your job. Remember, we're still in China. All right. So that's, and of course, notice they had all their nice reports, the Apple's supplier responsibility progress reports. Like, who can argue with that, man? That's, wow. That must mean they're getting the job done. The acronym, ASRPR. So somebody calls on at the end of the month, says, Fred, hey, Fred, Mary, Tom, Suzette, is the ASRPR ready yet? And you think like, man, that sounds so glamorous. I want one of them. Until we understand that behind all that stuff lies still some very serious problems. Notice also GRC encompasses even what we call social responsibility. We have a responsibility to treat our employees with dignity, to protect the environment, to definitely not have child labor at all. Children are supposed to be home nestled with their parents because they have a lifetime to be adults in the stinky world. Why would we drag them into that adult world and treat them with such disdain? Okay? We can only hope that these kinds of GRC violations will not be allowed to continue, wherever they might be. All right, thank you very much, Danielle. Kendira, are you there? Kendira. Okay. Who's next while we wait for Kendira? Cindy Newbold, are you there? Danielle something. Are you there, Cindy Newbold? Okay. We have to do a little GRC as well. Okay. Linnell, are you there? Linnell?
I am.
Okay, there you are, Linnell. We're at the top already. A couple of your colleagues have gone off for coffee, so I got to you sooner than I anticipated. But thanks for chipping in. Can you pick up where we left off after these progress reports, these wonderful progress reports that are produced by Apple's people to make everything look hunky-dory?
We're on the top of page 311.
We're not at the top, we are down in the middle. Paragraph number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Extreme profit maximizing business practices.
Yes.
Okay. It has been alleged that Apple could have easily prevented labor abuses in all its suppliers' plants in a matter of days if it had wished to do so. There are a few manufacturers in the entire world that have the capability of mobilizing enough factories and workers to meet the production demand of Apple's iPhones and iPads. And this makes it extremely costly and time-consuming for Apple to find alternatives that allow for fair treatment of factory workers. However, the massive profits made by Apple and the immense purchasing power it commands should make it possible for it to eliminate harsh working conditions with its suppliers' factories without eliminating this profitability.
And so what if you have to erode a little bit of profitability? The devil with it. Do it. So what if you're going to lose like a couple $100 million. It's not a big deal for Apple. That's a drop in the bucket, period. All right. But they keep trying to talk about this profitability thing. Oh, we have to watch our bottom line, of course. But it's not supposed to be done at the expense of people's lives and working comfort. They are human beings and they're entitled to that GRC requirement. Yet many companies, even though they're offices of AC, they still have people working in something of a sweatshop, interestingly enough. All right, keep going.
Instead of acting to reduce abusive management practices within its supply chain, however, Apple has done the opposite by engaging in cost minimizing business practices that pressure suppliers to cut corners on production. The increasingly intricate designs and massive demands for iPhones combined with the low margins low margins Apple forces on its suppliers has led to suppliers competing with each other by forcing excessive overtime on workers, engaging in unsafe product practices, and employing underage workers.
Wow. So since everybody is under pressure to produce the cheapest product in their factories across the country in Asia and China, uh, there's a pressure to produce it as cheaply as possible. Otherwise, there's no doubt a threat. If you don't come up with cheaper products for this assembly line, we're going to have find somebody who will. And so as a result, we continue with child labor because we feel we don't have to pay children anywhere near the required fee. And children are very passive. They're not going to strike or lick anybody in the head with a conch shell or something like this. Okay, so they continue to be violated. All right, keep going. Keep going.
Okay.
You know,
If Apple increases efforts to make its supply chain free of workforce abuses, not only would it improve the working conditions in its suppliers' factories, but other consumer electronic giants would also be forced to follow Apple's example, as many of them share the same suppliers. As the industry leader, Apple can do this by increasing funding to its work environment improvement efforts, providing financial incentives to its suppliers, by shifting its supply chain to give preference to suppliers with a better record on labor rights issues, and reducing the cost constraints placed on suppliers, which would reduce the pressure to cut corners on production.
yeah.
For a long time, there has been much debate over the corporate social responsibility of large corporations. There are questions on whether corporations should act solely on economic considerations or also on social and moral considerations, how these considerations should be measured and accounted for, and how far down the supply chain a corporation's responsibilities should extend. Some believe corporations must follow a certain established set of standards that protect the rights of workers, while others have suggested that non-corporate bodies such as governments, international institutions, and unions should take the lead in labor reforms and oversight. In
Mhm.
recent years, corporations are feeling increasingly more pressure to take responsibility for the behavior of its partners overseas, a trend that would hopefully continue until laborers around the world become completely free of workforce abuses.
Indeed.
Question.
The question
Sorry.
and the question.
Based on what you have read about, do you believe Apple operates CRS, corporate response? I think that's the corporate responsibility,
Yes.
uh, policies and practices that can be held up as models for best practice. What is the basis for your opinion?
Okay. Thank you very much, Danelle. Uh, another mouthful of GRC practices continue to plague us in the Situation Room. As much as we see the attempts are made to alleviate the problems, somehow new problems along the same lines keep coming up. I guess this comes with the territory, but certainly if we can send a man to the moon, meaning a woman as well, then we can send people to the moon. Uh, how come we have difficulties resolving these quote unquote simple issues such as child labor? abusive overtime practices, etc. You may be surprised to know that in some companies in the Bahamas, they still try to practice that lame business activity by mistreating staffers, intimidating them, overworking them, and so on. In fact, that's one of the reasons why unions evolved over the many decades, because at some point there was nobody to represent the people, which means that management, for the most part, was very abusive, unbelievably abusive to employees. There was a time when persons worked literally 7 days a week until somebody argued and fought, and then it went down to 6 days a week. And in some countries now even 5 days a week. Okay. And I understand in places like France and other European countries, they're now pushing for 4-day work weeks. How about that? The whole idea, of course, it only could be the French to initiate it, is to have more time to have wine, be with family, have fun, and all that good stuff. Okay. Whether a 4-day work week will evolve into that, only time will tell. Because there'll be no doubt that if folks can get away with murder, they will continue to do so. Okay. Even Cain, when he hit Abel in his head and killed him, tried to get away with murder. He tried to hide from God. And God is like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, nothing. And so ever since Cain killed Abel and tried to hide or lie, the world has been in a mess, doing the same old thing. And notice it doesn't matter which country it is in the world, it's prevalent wherever we go. Okay? All right, good stuff. Okay, Shari Moxie, are you still there? She's like, no way. I'm not here at the moment. Janessa, are you there? Mhm. Okay. Alberta, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we're back to you again, Alberta, but that's fine. Um, some of your colleagues are having an extended coffee, and I figure after all day, that's okay too. So Alberta, we're back to you. This time, we're talking about GRC from a risk management perspective and a government perspective to see if we can tie these academic things that we've been studying over the last couple of weeks into the real world. All right, so why don't you pick up with risk management?
Risk management and governance. The Fukushima
Yeah, Fukushima.
Daiichi nuclear power plant disaster on 11th of March 2011, what turned out to be probably the fourth largest tsunami in the past 100 years, hit the coast of Japan and killed over 15,000 people. The potential magnitude of the tsunami triggered earthquakes affecting this region of Japan had been grossly underestimated, and a magnitude 9 shock and 9.1 meter tsunami hit in the area of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This caused the third most severe accident in such an installation ever. Interestingly, while the Inagua power plant,
Onagawa.
Onagawa,
Yeah.
okay,
Japanese.
the Onagawa power plant was also hit by the tsunami of approximately the same height of Daiichi. It survived the event remarkably undamaged.
Mm-hmm.
Failures have been referred to as a cascade of engineering and regulations, ultimately resulting in the Fukushima disaster. In summary, insufficient attention had been given to evidence of large tsunamis inundating the region earlier, to Japanese research suggesting that large earthquakes could occur anywhere along subduction zone, and to new research on mega thrusts carried out after the Boxing Day 2004 tsunami. There were unexplainably different design conditions for nuclear power plants at close distances from each other.
Mm-hmm.
The hazard, the hazard analysis to calculate the maximum probable tsunami at Dahashi appeared to have had methodological mistakes which nobody experienced in tsunami engineering would have made. There were substantial inadequacies in the Japan nuclear regulatory structure. The Fukushima
Mhm.
accident preventable if international best practices and standards had been followed, if there had been international views and common sense had prevailed in the interpretation of pre-existing geological and hydrodynamic findings. There were insufficient formal standards in place for evaluating the tsunami. Vulnerability of such power plants for specific training of engineers and scientists who perform tsunami computations for emergency preparedness and critical facilities, or for regulators who review these safety studies.
Now
Nuclear
stick a pin, Alberta, for just 1 second. Let me say something about what you were saying. Notice all this Japanese mumbo jumbo at the end of the day. What does it boil down to? Stuff we keep saying over and over. It was preventable. And many GRC issues are preventable. If only we'd take the time, get away from our egos, stop arguing about who's the best among the pack, and God knows what else, or other power plays that people play when they're doing these jobs, and instead of settling down, listening to each other, and taking the best advice. Okay. So in each case, we discover, wait a minute, 15,000 people, and that's a minimum, underestimate, we don't know for sure. All went down because it could have been prevented. We just needed somebody with the capability and the interest to resolve. If you don't believe me, think about where you work. Some people work very hard to get things done, and others are always on some form of cruise control. They are very interested in the benefits, but they're not particularly interested in the work. Okay? So, key thing, this is GRC not from a company perspective or an entity perspective or financial institute perspective, but GRC on a very high scale, very jurisdictional scale, very territorial scale, countrywide, in a country no less than Japan. All right, keep going.
Nuclear power plants rely on cooling from nearby water bodies even after routine shutdowns, no matter what operating system they use. For emergencies, they have two alternative sources of emergency power: batteries and emergency diesel generators. Sometimes they have an emergency source of cooling water that can flow to the plant under gravity, even when there is complete loss of external power. The Fukushima Daiichi plant relied almost exclusively on auxiliary power from batteries and generators for cooling during emergencies. Fukushima Daiichi was commissioned in 1966 and is operated by Tokyo Electric Power Company. The wave of the 2011 tsunami arrived at the plant about 40 minutes after the earthquake, with the second wave arriving about 10 minutes later. All three operational reactors, 1, 2, and 3, started being shut down automatically, and apparently the control rods were inserted. The tsunami damaged all off-site electrical transmission facilities. A backup transmission line from the national electricity grid failed due to the mismatched sockets.
Mismatched, yes, keep going.
Diesel generators started operating, but then the tsunami flooded 12 of the 13 units available, resulting in complete loss of electrical power at reactors 1 through 5. This condition is known as station blackout. Other than reactors 5 and 6 that were jerry rigged to one surviving generator. The others were left on battery power, which only lasted for approximately another 8 hours. The cooling was lost in reactor 1 after several hours, in reactor 2 after about 71 hours, and reactor 3 in about 36 hours.
Now notice, folks, we all tying up our tongues with all this doggone nuclear mumbo jumbo. But even as a layperson, we could spot the GRC problems right away. Clearly, just from the language being used in this case, in the discussion, that they did not take every possible measure to secure that facility, especially since they knew this was not a fly-by-night facility. Other countries like Russia and others have experienced loss and destruction as a result of these kinds of entities, yet they look like they were taking a whole lot of things for granted, which is how organizations get in a mess as well when they are contemplating these GRC issues. They are not looking at it seriously. They're taking so many shortcuts. They're trying to save money to impress somebody on the bottom line so that they can get more bonuses in a particular year. God knows what these teams think about, these organizations think about in terms of securing the GRC practice. Okay. All right, keep going.
What was unprecedented was the almost simultaneous loss of both on-site generator power and battery power, an event that had not been considered as possibility. Yet, with doomed, the Fukushima Daiichi was the elevation of the generators above sea level, placing them where they would be flooded in such a situation is difficult to understand and suggests that secondary importance had been placed on the risks of economic flooding in the safety assessment for the plant. The risk had not been properly analyzed.
So yeah, the risk, thank you very much, Alberta. The risk had not been properly analyzed. Same problem with many firms around the world, many countries around the world. They're all guilty of this very same statement. The risks had not been properly analyzed. You go on a date and you see some inconsistencies with your date. Because we don't analyze our risk properly, we ignore what we think we see, or we're so blinded by something, being in love, being on a date, having my own girl, whatever the reason is, create these kinds of risks where we do not properly analyze the situation, and then we do not see the devastation until after the fact. Okay? Most unfortunate, common GRC problems. We see so many firms suffer, yet we don't go back to sufficiently fix our own. We assume, quite rightly so far for some people, that nothing will happen. But of course, there's an old saying that what doesn't happen in a million years will certainly happen in a split second. All right, thank you, Alberta. Okay, Angela, are you here yet? Okay. Ginger. I'm Ginger and I'm not here yet. Okay. Shari Nixon, are you here? Okay. So that takes us back to Akobe. Akobe, are you still with us?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay. Believe it or not, we are back to you. And you are now in the Fukushima Daiichi doggone dilemma. All right. So why don't you pick up from 313 and notice the cases vary. We go from a familiar financial institution to another familiar one to a co-op, which is another type of financial institution, all the way up to a countrywide GRC issue. Okay. And so even if you're getting questions like GRC questions, uh, and you're trying to build your response, you have to be able to want to say that these are the different perspectives with regards to the impacts of not properly advocating for GRC issues. And these are the consequences. And then you make your references. And then you make your notation that GRC is not subject only to banks and insurance companies, for example, but, and then you go on to include the fact that these things happen in co-ops, other financial institutions, and on a countrywide basis. Okay? And all that kind of stuff, again, depending on your question, can only be helpful. All right, Akobe, a catalog.
A catalog of industrial, regulatory, and engineering failures. The seeds of the Fukushima Daiichi accident were laid during the construction of the plant.
Construction at the beginning. Kiss my foot. So this thing didn't even start at the end. It started at the beginning. Just a lot like uh, when we see the newspaper report that another young Bahamian male has been shot and killed for whatever reason. Somehow, just like Fukushima, we think this started
Oh,
last month when he joined the gang. Truth of the matter is, it did not start there. It started with him when he was a little boy without a father, whose mom was probably tied up with stuff and other issues, etc. Nobody to watch out for him to know where the hell he was, what he was doing, whether he was doing his homework, whether he was actually in his bed at night, and so on, and who his company were. See? So, yes, he got shot in his 20s or teens, but that's not where it began. Same principle. Before uh, Kobe even made that statement, we presume it began at the end. It did not. It began during the construction. Imagine that. Imagine how surprising that might be. Imagine if you could go back into the lives of these young men who are GRC issues as well to find out what really happened and why they ended up the way they are. I can assure you, just like the construction thing with this company, it's not initially and certainly not entirely their fault. I wonder who is going to scream that it's not our fault when it is now discovered that it began even at the construction stage. All right, keep going.
Uh, the plant site was approximately 30 meters above sea level on a natural berm that ran along the shoreline. According to documents filed in 1967 with Japanese authorities, TEPCO reduced the height of this berm to 10 meters to make it easier for to ferry equipment to the site and to make it easier to pump seawater to the reactors, with the added advantage of the base being closer to bedrock, helpful in reducing the impact of earth tremors. Although this may be true, it is clear that the company did not adequately consider the tsunami risk history of Japan. A major regulatory failure was in the specification of the design earthquake. Any tsunami hazards study begins with the extensive analysis of the likelihood of earthquakes that could result in tsunami. Best practice is to assume that the largest analyzed event can occur anywhere along the coast within range of the proposed reactor. In 2002, the International Atomic Energy Agency recommended a 150-kilometer radius as the range over which geophysical events would be of interest in a hazard analysis, which was extended to 300 kilometers in 2010. The Japanese Nuclear Regulatory Agency should have understood the risk factors better better before agreeing to the design and the work to reduce the height of the natural defenses at the site.
Okay, stick a pin 1 second, Kobe. So these guys knew that Japan and that area had a history. They were warned to extend the range. They knew that they had to do certain things in the construction that would make the people of Japan in that area less vulnerable. Yet, nobody took any steps to follow all that great advice. And I suppose if only 15,000 people died, maybe in their perspective, what's the big deal? The earth is overpopulated anyway, God forbid. Okay? All right, and then keep going.
A last chance to avoid the accident was lost. The 28th of February, 2010, a Chilean earthquake and substantial impact in locations close to its coast, and it triggered a trans-Pacific tsunami, which reached Japan.
Mhm.
TEPCO did what appears to have been a new and entirely internal study to analyze the safety of the Fukushima Daiichi from tsunamis. It is possible that on this basis, in February 2011, the Japanese government granted a 10-year extension in the operating permit for Unit 1. The study recommended that to ensure the safety of the coastal power facilities, the design tsunami should be the highest one at the site among all historical and possible future tsunamis that can be estimated. And a few pages further, for tsunamis induced by active submarine faults, the relevant area is estimated from a survey of the active faults and the literature. TEPCO did not appear to have heeded their recommendation in its reassessment of the Fukushima Daiichi.
Now, before you go on to the end of this, um, notice all this advice, all this information that these professionals were given. Please bear in mind for your own personal development and professional that GRC issues are not violated because people don't have information, knowledge, or skills. Oftentimes they're violated for political reasons and monetary reasons and self-interest reasons. At the end of the day, the common denominator is always a bleak one in these situations. People die. All too often, though, interestingly enough, the people who are responsible are oftentimes not the ones who end up dying. How ironic is that? All right, and then finally, Jacoby, the post-mortem, the after death.
The post-mortem analysis of national and international agencies. In the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster, several national and international agencies produced reports about the accident, trying to identify its causes. TEPCO's post-disaster report claims that the company consistently followed the accepted methodologies, but that also they voluntarily conducted reviews and investigations whenever knowledge or theories on tsunamis are newly proposed. The report then refers to their own internal study in 2008 to assess 2002 analysis that an 8.2 magnitude earthquake could occur anywhere off the coast, but claims there was no wave source model to assess the impact and that the effect on tsunami's height is not necessarily instantly determined.
My, still making excuses.
The report acknowledges the receipt of a manuscript of thesis in progress on the Jogan tsunami sent by Professor Kenji Sataki, and that with the objective of obtaining accurate information, they undertook to search for tsunami deposits in the area, which yielded no evidence of tsunami deposits. Furthermore, the report states that that March 11th, 2011 event was neither the earthquake proposed in accordance with the previous opinion nor the Jogan earthquake proposed by Sataki, but rather it was found to have been a massive earthquake covering a wider seismic source region. Nonetheless, the report also states that their pre-event analysis was conservative.
Mm.
Such statements, in light of actual events, raises the possibility of criminal negligence. Possibly the most realistic and useful assessment of the accident is that of the National Diet of Japan. It was produced after 900 hours of hearings and 1,167 interviews. It is critical and does not attempt to give the benefit of the doubt to those responsible. The report comments that the mindset that contributed in the disaster can be found across Japan's insularity. The report states that nuclear power in Japan had become immune to the scrutiny of civil society and that its regulation was entrusted to the same government bureaucracy responsible for its promotion. This in itself suggests a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Further, it blames the disaster on bureaucrats who put organizational interests ahead of their paramount duty to protect public safety. The report concludes that TEPCO was too quick to blame tsunami as the cause of damage and suggests that the earthquake itself damaged the equipment, with the possibility of loss of cooling water before the arrival of the tsunami. A major finding is that the Prime Minister's office and the government did not function correctly because boundaries between responsible parties and agencies were problematic due to their ambiguity.
My. And the question?
If you think about the typical risk management methodologies, where do you think that the greatest failures were in this case? Was it the failure to identify the risks or failure to assess them correctly and therefore take appropriate mitigating actions? What about the governance? Did poor governance ultimately result in the ability to identify, assess, and manage the risks?
Thank you very much, Jacoby. Uh, uh, there's no doubt that we all should know the answers to these questions. This is a typical risk management topology problem. And usually where there are risk management problems, there are significant failures. The writers have took great pains to describe the incompetence that occurred as a result of this tsunami and the related earthquake. And I suspect they did that to try to impose upon the will of students the importance of ensuring that whatever governance, risk, and compliance issues are required within an environment, an entity, in your own agenda, we have to start taking those risk responsibilities seriously. Okay? The other thing we need to be careful about is failure to identify risk. I don't think the Japanese violated that much. They knew very well what the risks were. The problem is they did not take sufficient steps to mitigate or deal with those risks. People who they should be listening to, they refused to listen to. Persons told them that what the problems were, they ignored the solutions, and they simply went on with their bureaucratic and other busy lives. And of course, ultimately, so many innocent people who potentially could have been saved ended up floating away somewhere into the sea. Okay? All right. So some very intriguing cases in our situation room, a very diverse background of cases. Again, when you are making references to your cases, if you do for your paper, please remember that you don't want to be too long-winded, but you don't want to say little short things like Jesus wept, like a short sentence. Certainly, they don't want you to ramble on too long forever because you have other things to write. But when you make reference, your answer should be crisp and clear and to the point. Don't ramble. Don't give too many unnecessary details. I tell you, they made some interesting observations that we're going to talk about in a minute. And I certainly encourage you all, if you're not aware of them, to please give consideration as you approach your second paper. Does everybody? Probably not. All right, let me just see if I can share my screen here so that you can see what I'm saying in case you don't have a version of this. Okay. Great. Can everybody see that? Those soldiers who are still with us, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so now we're into talking about a little about your assignment, one of which you've already done. So you're no stranger to the pain and suffering of a ICA UK assignment. Okay. What you are doing now is trying to get yourself ready for the second assignment to see if you can even improve upon what you
Third
did.
assignment, Mr. Wilkinson, not the second. It's our final one.
Oh, final. Okay. Assignment 3, yes. Okay. That's the one that's due July 12th, yes?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So you guys are pretty experienced then in fighting with assignments. That means that I should just have to say improve upon the first two and thank you very much. But I'll say a little bit more than that because each assignment tends to be unique in its context, but certainly your response and your approach to them needs to be unique as well. Okay, one cover does not fit all. I think you've kind of figured that out. All right. So some of this might be familiar to some students because you would have taken the time to read the comments. And for those of you who may not have seen it for a while or not even looked at it, like the devil with it, I'm busy. I'll get to it later. Let's take a look at what the examiners had to say about the most recent paper, I think, that was submitted. Now, they have like a little prologue here, which is interesting. If you can see my screen, it says, it is important to acknowledge that the intention of these comments is not to support the mark allocated and are intended only to provide feedback on the assignment by highlighting those areas that are generally well covered or where improvement in coverage and content could be made. Okay, great. It is recommended, however, that candidates, that's you guys, take the time to consider your particular assignment submission in terms of the comments below. All right. So let's see what they had to say. That you're familiar with. Look at this little summary down here. 59% of candidates found themselves in the distinction and merit making, which is not bad, actually, for these guys. So that means that students did pretty well. Those who did well. Notice candidates who achieve marks in these marking bands produce what? Now, please take note of this word. It's a very popular British word and non-British word. Robust answers to all the questions. Robust means that your answers must not only relate to the question itself first and foremost, but your examples must be clear, concise, and sufficient. Meaning that first of all, the examples have to be related to the question you're answering. They are not expected to be forever in their length, and they're not expected to be like little short answers. They are expected to be robust, somewhere in between. Okay. Notice also they're looking for consistency in approaching the answers. A lot of times, for example, I've seen students in other courses that I've taught, you raise a particular question, they're not sure about the answer, they start writing about anything they can remember, hoping that the correct answer will show up somewhere in what they wrote. That is definitely not the approach you want to take. Okay? Make sure you read your questions carefully. Make sure that you understand clearly what the question is asking. Notice what the examiners said. Many students provided knowledge, see, information, but they were not always, but this knowledge or information didn't always answer the question that was being asked. They might wrote a bunch of great stuff, but what FATF said, and what the OECD is all about, and what suspicious transactions are suggesting that we do. So we're not really answering the question. Try to avoid that at all costs. One of the key ways to do that is to read your question several times. Go to sleep and get up and read it again and again and again. And then ask yourself, what are they really asking for? And if you take that approach, you'll find that your answers will be more targeted. Okay? So be careful. In some cases, the question was not addressed at all, but there was sufficient knowledge in order for some students to gain a minimum mark, just over 50. That's interesting. Please take note of that. Imagine some persons didn't address many of the questions, but still wrote about enough knowledge stuff in their opinion to pass the course of 50 or 50 something. That is a gamble either way, because while you might write enough knowledge stuff to get over the 50%, it might not deign to be, depending who your examiner is, sufficient enough, and you can easily find yourself on the failing side of the paper. Okay, so be careful, be careful, be careful. All right. Now we're down to the specific comments, and each of these comments are absolutely crucial, whether you realize it or not, whether you agree with them or not. I encourage you to look at them, all of the comments that are made, and try to govern yourselves accordingly in your final paper. That's why I'm suggesting don't wait until the last minute, unless you're that super duper last minute person that's gotten away with last minute stuff from preschool. If you're not such a person, don't mess with that last minute stuff. It puts you on a pendulum that oftentimes you know not where it's going to swing. All right. So part A. Again, they're referring to specific questions. You know what they are. And the reason why I'm reiterating it, because the same principles apply to the final assignment in one form or another. So please take note. We are told that the candidate's approach to this particular question. Okay, we had certain types of analysis going on in terms of how they understood the question. They made their references to FATF in terms of the predicate of offenses for tax and so on. But there are other things that were not discussed. So we referenced some things, but then other things like predicate issues, tax evasion related issues that were actually not discussed. And notice a very key point. I think somebody raised it earlier. Can I use examples outside of my text? And I said yes. Because notice they say very specifically, examples were lacking by some, which would have helped them to illustrate and make their points. So as much as possible, please give examples. Please do not make them too generic. Make them specific to your question and your answer. Please do not take it for granted that you can write a little bit or too much. You are stuck with the expectation to be able to write enough to answer the question. All right, taking a shortcut to it is not going to work, and going on and on and on is not going to work either, okay, for sure. All right, part B. There was a differentiation, we were told, between those students who are able to provide and explain the work pertaining to your question, and they provided commentary and all that, evaluations, etc. As opposed, notice what they say, as opposed to mere knowledge. Please be careful. They don't want you to fill them up with just the facts that they already know. They want to see if you can get into a question and provide what we call commentary or your own personal perspective, that you can go and evaluate the question and say, what does this question ask me? And what the heck should my answer look like in order to make this question suitable and beneficial? Okay? So be careful. A lot of us sometimes we get caught up with the knowledge side. We just start writing about what we remember, but are not issues. But a lot of times, knowledge alone is not enough for you to get to the paper. Notice you're told that the question specifically asked, see that word specific? And when you are going through your final paper, do not take anything for granted. Do not overlook important words like specifically, because they like to throw in 1 or 2 words to see if you get it in terms of understanding the context of the question, rather than just trying to let them know that you are familiar with the content of the question. Be careful. All right, part C. Many candidates were able to provide recommendations regarding the question and blah, 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 about what the firm should put in place to guard against potential sanctions, breach, etc. However, those who explained how the systems and controls were protected in detail, supported by examples and blah, 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 and potential consequences achieved better marks. So see, in each case, yes, you can give your knowledge, but you have to go the extra mile in terms of how your question can be answered. A big part of why students lose points in answering assignment questions is because they don't read the question carefully enough. They don't come up with evaluations and recommendations and their own conclusions and feedback enough. They don't use enough examples. It's a recurring problem. Okay? So I say, do not make that mistake in paper 3. Okay? Notice they tell you unequivocally, students, that you should have focused on the nature of the framework in the question and the risks, etc., relative to your question. The key stuff here is focus, properly assess your question, make sure every answer you make is relevant to your question in one form or another. Okay? That's the point. If there are any relevant policies and procedures and all the stuff that you need to discuss relative to your question, do discuss them. Just don't go on and on and on, and just don't make them too short. They want you to come up with a full set of examples, evaluations, references, etc., within the context of your word limit, which is another issue. Okay? All right. Part D of the question. Those candidates who covered both aspects of the question, meaning answering the question in its entirety, notice their reference, international guidelines, which is your text, and the general population outside of the text. Okay? Please reference as many as you could, considering carefully at all times your not only time constraints, but also the issue of words. You only have a certain amount of words. And I've said to students over and over, when you do your first draft, don't worry about how many words you write. Just write the hell out of stuff using some of these techniques. And you'll find at the end of the day, even when you go back to look at your first rough draft, you're like, my God, I only need 3,000 words. This looks like 17,350. That's okay. Now is the time for doing the editing. And that's why I say start early. Because if you're doing this thing completely, this is not an overnight affair. This should keep you tied down for quite some time in terms of coming up with the correct responses to each of your unique questions. Okay? Don't let them fool you. The questions are sometimes very smooth, which can lead you to thinking, oh, this is great. I get it. And then when you read it again, you're like, I don't get it anymore. And you keep doing that until you think you've gotten the question itself. Before you start your research and your writing and your drafts and all that stuff, please try to make sure you understand the question first, okay? In its entirety, not part of it, not the driving side of it, none of that stuff, okay? It's like going into the doctor's office and he's diagnosing the problem. Unless he diagnoses the problem correctly, dog is going to eat somebody's lunch. Right? The wrong decision, the wrong part is going to be cut off. As a matter of fact, I read not too long ago where a guy went under for a routine operation. When he got up, he had one leg. What do you think happened there? Did it fall off? Certainly not. The doctor clearly misread the information on his bed plate where they keep the information where the doctors come in. The little part look at it as, oh, okay, this is the one for open heart surgery. For whatever reason, he was reading cut off the right, left or right leg. So imagine the person gets up and is like, what the heck is my leg? And I guess, well, that was the operations. I didn't come here for that. Okay, GRC. Which is why, even in the case of doctors performing surgery, they have protocols to make sure that the doctor, hopefully, is aware of as many things as he can, that the first patient is a transplant patient, that they have a rare kind of disease, they have certain diseases that can conflict with anesthesia, and so on. Same principle. And that's how you need to approach your answers. Okay? Notice we are told specifically the specific areas are referenced, in this case in part F. We are told that the answer should have gone on to include consideration of the business risk profile and so on. So they get kind of specific. The principles and applications, ID, management of risk. In other words, every question they ask you is, what the hell they're asking? And what part of my textbook in Google do I need to go? And once you raise that initial question, then you'll find that you come up with a better thesis for answering your question more completely. Okay? And of course, those who frame their answers by giving all this extra information, like the application, the risk profiles, and all these other related stuff, please make sure you are clear when you're noting them and try not to go on, because they don't seem to be thrilled by the knowledge base. They want you to do it, but they certainly have emphasized all too often that you have to be careful with your interpretive side. Okay? Your interpretive side. That's the side that will make you or break you. Okay? All right. And then finally, they were kind enough to say that there were some issues which permeated or extended the assignments of some candidates, and they took the time to highlight them. And so I'm going to take a moment just to bring it to your attention. Even if you've seen it before, it's important to hear it and to be reminded. And that's really the idea here. All right, number one, watch this. Several candidates failed even to answer all questions. Now, folks, please, to put it simply, don't miss a question. Okay? They missed the whole boat. Once you start missing questions, you put yourself to an immediate disadvantage. Can you still pass? Maybe if you get lucky, you might get 50 something, but you cannot leave off several questions and expect to pass or do nearly as great as somebody who did not do that. Okay? Be careful. All right, number 2, some candidates misinterpreted, see, the word count rules. How about that? Something as fundamental as that, you think like everybody knows what the word count rules are. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. Okay, so be very careful. The word count rules, the footnote rules. If you do not know them, if you do not show them, they're going to mark you down. All right, so be careful. And the Brits are very meticulous about that, unlike some American schools or Canadian, they might get a couple of things go, so to speak. But not those bloody Brits. They're always checking for all the details. Okay? And then number 3, too many candidates, that's you guys, fail to include any reference at all. See? My God. And some candidates who use the footnotes fail to fully reference material which was relied on and replicated in your answer. No doubt, if you have any doubt that it's yours, it won't be long before they start looking to take off points for your failing to look at these what appear to be unassuming and unimportant issues. It's those little things that I talked about throughout this assessment that will drown you. Most students have the core issues down pat. They'll write things from head to hell. That's not your problem, in my opinion, and from what I've seen from several papers. The problem is looking after these details that some students even discovered in their minds. They decided they're not even consequential. I can assure you they are. Okay? So be careful. Make sure you understand the word count. Keep reading your question until you understand it completely before you start writing. And please only put in your paper information, examples, etc., that relate to your question. Otherwise, you'll be right back to square one and either failing the paper or not doing nearly as well as you could have done. Okay? Be very careful. All right. Then, of course, they go on to discuss more detail about the questions, things that students should have alluded to. I guess that's for those who needed to get a little bit more like why I failed, why I got 50 something, and then the rest of them who did fairly well, like yes, doggone, I'm glad I added all those details. Okay, let me give you an example about the kinds of details that they are looking for in terms of your answers. Okay, notice what they say. There was no mention, and this is in particular reference to a particular question from the last time. There was no mention of the inadvertent transfer of the proceeds of foreign tax evasion. See? Those kinds of core statements. They're always watching for stuff like that. The only problem is you don't think they're looking for those little subtleties. Oh, it's not a big deal. I have a lot of other things to write, which means you keep providing knowledge, but not enough information to support what's really going on. Okay. All right, notice they reference a discussion that was provided on a bank heist in Bangladesh and all that good stuff. And so they're looking for these kinds of details, not forever details and not little ninja mini details, just enough to support your position. Okay. All right. Look at some other detail down in F, a big old fat paragraph about more stuff. The candidate discussed the application of the risk-based approach to AML-CFT in relation to casino industry. It's a Bahamas problem as well. the need for the design of the RBA to address the policies and procedures of the business process, etc., while conforming to local regulations, blah, blah, blah. It did a great job providing that information. The view was that the assessment of the product, blah, blah, blah. They go on, so yeah, these are the key things we're looking at. And they actually kind of spread them out in their responses just to give you an idea, to keep you from rambling, to keep you focused in your answer. Please don't ramble on and on and on. Please don't give little short spurts here and there. It'll drive your examiners nuts. Okay? Please. Is style and presentation important? Yes, they are. Maybe not for some students, but for examiners, they are. Style, presentation, and the quality of your references. Right? And I cannot, well, look, here's a positive note on style, presentation, and references. The paper was an essay style format. Headers were used throughout. See, these guys gone right down to the doggone nitty gritty. Headers were used throughout. Grammatical errors were present that could have been easily spotted by proofreading. Now, students, all I can say, a word to the wise is sufficient. Clearly, even something as simple as what you might think is just grammar and spelling, to them, it might carry more weight in terms of your assessment than you might think. And notice they drop a hint. These grammatical errors could have been easily what? Spotted by proofreading. What is the implication? They're like, man, you guys are so lazy, or you started so late that you didn't have chance for somebody else or for yourself to proofread this. So be careful. You can lose points for simple things. And remember, every point you lose is a point that you should be adding. All right, so be careful. Don't let the little things cause you not to do the best you can do. Okay? And however, in summary, they were generous. This particular person didn't do great, but they passed it. And so that even though that commentary was very convoluted and full with all kinds of watch this, watch that, be careful with this and that, they had something, what it appears to be, positive to say. And here's what they said. Their candidate demonstrated knowledge of the subject areas. Although they say a deeper focus, see, a deeper focus would have enhanced the responses. My. And notice how they end their little discussion for you guys. This situation mentioned earlier has impacted the opportunity for further marks. See? So if your grammar is not checked and your spelling is not checked and your punctuation is not checked, clearly it does carry value in this particular organization, okay, of your work. So be very careful, very careful. All right. Having said all of that, does anybody have any specific questions that they want to raise or that you want to raise relative to any of your assignment questions? Where you have begun so far and you spotted something, let me ask a question about that. Do you have any such situations pending that you need to get feedback on in light of this commentary?
I don't know if exactly in light of the commentary, but question 1.
Yes.
Broken down, it says research and evaluate the existing approach of corporate governance in a regulated firm based in a jurisdiction and sector of your choice.
Yes.
Produce a report for the board that board of that firm, which represents the main findings from your research project and bullet point 1 identifies 3 of the main elements of corporate governance, and for each of these elements, explain why and to whom each of these are important within the firm. And then the second part is include recommendations for improvements in the current approach, supporting these with appropriate examples and clear evidence of how and why these improvements would benefit the firm. For the first portion of it, I'm assuming we pick 3 elements of corporate governance, what makes up corporate governance. And
But what 3 did they ask for?
they just said identify 3 of the main elements. So
No,
I'm saying,
see, I know, I'm just slowing you up for a reason. They didn't just say identify 3, right?
yes.
They were very specific. And sometimes when students are in an examination setting or doing these kinds of papers, we don't see like words like MAIN. Remember, is that in there?
Identifies 3 of the main elements, yeah.
Yeah, but you can easily read over mean and just be focused on what? 3.
3 elements, yeah.
See, I'm so happy you raised this because right off the top, this is a common mistake that students make. Be careful. Yes, the first thing they've asked you in doing your report to the board is to identify 3 of the main. So that means there are some others that are not considered main. Don't use the itsy bitsy ones. Try and find 3 heavy hitters. Do you follow my point?
Okay.
That will give you more results, more points. Okay, that's why we say main. Try and pick out 3 of the key ones that really are common and significant. That's the first thing. All right. And
So
on
in
that,
picking out 3 of the main, how do we establish what are the main elements? Because there are several. I mean, when you look at corporate governance, there's so much things that to me that I figure go into it. So how do we determine which ones we would say are main?
yeah. Now be careful. I get your point. And again, even though we say main, it doesn't mean it's going to be like main is just sitting and say, hi, I'm main. I agree. It doesn't work that way. All right. So now, again, what can you read that part of the question again? And notice what I said. Read that again. I said it for a reason. Because sometimes we only read it once. But you discover if you start looking at that again, say, wait a minute. Wait one cotton picking minute like that. So read that part again. What does it say?
Produce a report for the board of the firm which represents the main findings of your research project and identifies 3 of the main elements of corporate governance.
Okay, stick a pin. Now, immediately that should take you to where your discussion is in your text about the elements of corporate governance. Do you follow?
Yes, sir.
So now, when you get to the end of that one part, don't try to go to anything else yet. Just go in your text and find out, okay, where's that doggone table of contents with the elements of corporate governance? Where's everything on corporate governance? Then when I find everything, I need to find the elements. Because they didn't use the word elements by accident. No doubt in your text, there's a reference specifically somewhere to these are the elements. And once you've gotten that far and found the laundry list of elements, then you read through the laundry list, and based on the information that they say is a governance issue, you pick the most intense 3 that you feel. That there's no playbook for it. That's how you have to do it. Part of it is, yes, you go through the elements, first you find them. Because you can't pick them until you find them. So you have to find them first, and then you read through them. And then based on the information that each element represents, you choose 3 of them that we refer to what does main mean? Main means those elements that impact the firm directly, that can cause the firm pain and suffering if things don't go right, that are very popular in current environments. those are the kinds of criteria to help you to pick the three main ones. Okay. Now, don't lose sleep over, my God, did I really pick the three main ones? Don't get bogged down too much with it. The important thing is to find those elements, read through them, and then choose the three that are very common in terms of current practice and their impacts on a particular firm. Okay, so that's how you approach that part of the question. Notice, though, the amount of work involved just talking about it. You and I and the rest of us, like, just to try and get to the three elements. If we're going to do some digging, checking, and reading, just to find those three. But you have to do it just like that. Okay. All right. And now, what's the other part of the question after that?
It says, and for each of these, explain why and to whom each of these are important within the firm.
Okay, so now two questions in that, correct? For each of the three, yeah, for each of the three, explain why you say that it's a main element. And what's the second part of the question?
Why and to whom these are important within the
Yeah,
firm.
and to whom, exactly. And so if you don't see the to whom right away, then you have to go and do a little more research, because that will be right in that section where you're reading with elements. If they don't have it in the laundry list, keep reading and referencing in that chapter or that area, because in there you will discover to whom those elements, those three refer. And then once you find them, then you build them into your discussion. And of course, notice that once you find the three main elements, then it's saying two other questions connected to that. And you must make sure that you answer each of the two questions clearly and completely, using examples and references to respond. See my point? Don't just say, okay, I've addressed it too. It only took me a couple of words, and thank God, let me move on to the next part. No, don't do that. Answer each question as completely as you can. Doesn't matter if you go over the words in the first instance. You want to go over. Your first objective is to make sure you find those three bloody elements and answer those other two questions related to those three elements. See my point? And answer them as completely as you can, using examples and references and so on. And then once you're done,
It was
yes.
just my you got cut out. I couldn't hear anything you were saying.
Okay, what part did you not hear?
The last thing you was just talking about going into the text and finding the examples and explaining why. And then you said,
Yeah. So once you find your three main elements, and then you get to the second part, the two-part question pertaining to those three. Just make sure that you answer them as completely as possible using references and examples from your text and Google and any other sources. Again, don't go overboard, but please do reference your text and do reference one or two areas if you can find it on Google or otherwise that are related to your answer. Okay? Don't just throw stuff in just for information, so that folks can let folks know that you know who CFATF is and the OECD, and there's no question on them. Okay, so be careful with that. All right. Is that the end of the question?
No, it says include recommendations for improvement in the current approach, supporting these with appropriate examples and clear evidence of how and why these improvements will benefit the firm. My question is in relation to the word current approach. When they're referring to current approach, are they referring to instances where we're looking at, we had looked at rules-based approach, outcomes-based approach, or principled approach? Or are they talking about the approach in the firm? Whatever fictitious firm we pull up, we're supposed to give examples of or recommendations for improvements and how they deal with these elements within the firm. I wasn't sure what they meant by that when they say current approach.
Now, the question of the current approach, the fact that they refer to the current approach means that you have to ask yourself exactly what you just said. Like, what approach are they talking about? Well, the approach must take you back to the beginning of your question. And what was the beginning? What was the opening part of your question again?
Research and evaluate the existing approach of corporate governance in a regulated firm based in the jurisdiction and sector of your choice.
Okay, so then we're talking about it in that context. And so whatever information is in your text or in your references pertaining to those particular elements, you have to look at what is the most contemporary approach to be used in connection with them. We're using a risk-based approach, or we're using a GRC approach. Whatever the current approaches are to dealing with those problems, you have to research them. And based on your research, you have to research them and say what the current approaches are to dealing with them. You have to also say, based on those current approaches that you found, make your recommendations on what's best for the firm to do in terms of those approaches, and be as complete as you can. And what's the part of the question after recommendations?
Supporting these with appropriate examples and clear.
Exactly. All right. So in your recommendations and in your approaches, remember from when I was looking at the critique earlier, in all cases, you're looking for appropriate examples to support your positions from the very beginning of the question all the way to the end. Okay. Also, don't forget, you have to present it in a report form to the board, correct?
Yes.
Which means that your report to the board has to have a certain format, correct? I would suggest that if you're not familiar with how to make a report like that to the board, you go and look at a sample. Doesn't have to be a very sophisticated layout. You just look for a particular format and reporting to the board, and use that as your opening salvo, which will take you into answering your question. For example, the opening sentence might be, this report has been designed to provide the appropriate recommendations to the board of directors regards to its current blah, blah, blah situation. And the following contents are designed to, and then you can go into your question to highlight the three elements, blah, 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 and to make recommendations. See my point? Then that's your introductory response to the board. Then you go into answering your question in detail. In other words, if you're making a report to the board, don't just start by answering your question. Start with an opening paragraph as to what the purpose of this report and what you're seeking to discover and present to the board. And then you go into your detail. Make sense?
I guess.
You still have doubts about something. What is it?
I mean, I guess I'm still tuggling with the current approach part of it.
That you're struggling with it because you haven't found the three main elements yet.
Okay.
Once you get into your text and find out, first of all, what all the elements are, you'll find the three, you pick three that's appropriate. Remember, the three that you pick, not necessarily, there's no right or wrong answer once you pick the three elements. The important thing is to find the elements and then pick three of them. All right. And then once you pick them, then the latter part of your question in terms of current will be in relation to what is the current thought, concepts, teaching, etc., with regards to dealing with them. And they will be in your text or in your references in terms of what the current positions are. For example, the current position for central banks around the world is to take a risk-based approach to their review of institutions. And then you have to go into all the detail. This is not your answer, but I'm just saying. So the current position is taking a risk-based approach, and then you go into all the detail about what risk-based approach is, what the benefits are, etc. And so once you find out your three elements, then your answers should be the current position on those elements. And your recommendation should be based on these elements. And based on my analysis, which you would have provided by that time, I recommend that the firm should consider doing the following. One, take a risk-based approach to governance. Two, make sure that the board understands its responsibility to be ethical and to drive it. Three, whatever the case might be. And your recommendations should be based on your findings. Also, don't be afraid to go into Google, for example, or some other source and say, what are some suggested recommendations for these kinds of elements with regards to this topic? And it will give you some pointers, and then you create your own recommendations based on that and those that you come up with on your own. And you build a host of recommendations based on that. So it can become a very creative process. The key is find those three elements, then everything is going to be built around those three elements. That's the key. So that modern contemporary reference is all that is refer in your answer to those three elements. That's why they ask you that at the beginning, because everything you do after that will be related to those three. That's the point. And so don't stray. Keep your answers connected to those three elements and your recommendations. Okay? And that's a very loaded question, by the way. That's why you have to start early. Okay? The first part of that question can take you some hours to do well, because you have to research it, reference it, Google it, textbook it, and all that stuff, just to come up with three great elements. And that's part 1 and 2. The first part 1 and 2 related to that. That can take you a couple of hours, easy. Hence, you don't want to find yourself in any last-minute situation messing with any of those questions. You will drown and die the death, because they are not overnight affairs. I'm sure you know that. All right. Now, if you get stuck, like when you find your elements and you're like, okay, I found the elements and I think these three are great, and I've answered the first two questions pertaining to that. If when you get to that point, you still feel like, or when you get to your current question part of it, and you're like, okay, where do I go from here? If you're still feeling that edginess after all that, send me an email and say, hi, this is me. I'm the one who was edgy about that bloody question. I'm still edgy. This is what I've done so far. Any suggestions? And I'll be happy to look at it real quick for you and see if I believe you're on the right track or not. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. I know it's stinky, but don't worry about it. Just go for it. And if you feel you're getting stuck somewhere along the way, feel free to drop me a note, give me a buzz or whatever, and let me see if I can create some comfort based on what you've done. But go ahead and do that part of it first, because by the time you get into it, you might say, oh, what the hell was I worried about? I see what he means. And then you can't stop writing. By the time you finish writing and referencing and giving examples, you're up to 10,000 words. You have to get rid of 7,000, or whatever the case might be. All right. All right. So yeah, good luck. It's not designed to be straightforward. All right. So don't worry about it. Just give it your best shot. Any other questions? Of course, if you think about anything between now and next class, don't forget we have one more session. Write down any other concerns you might have. Also, if you have any questions from our little question discussion that we were just talking about, by the time we meet again, make a note of them and let's talk about them a little further. Because of course, the question you raised tonight about that question and the answers that we discussed and anything that you raise next week will no doubt be helpful to your colleagues as well. So feel free, if you have any questions further with regards to any other questions or to that particular one further after you've done a little research this week, raise it next week. Let's chit chat a little further, like, I found those elements and here's where I'm stuck or whatever case. Feel free to raise it and let's chit chat about it. I'm sure somebody will be the beneficiary as well. All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you guys have a great week. I don't envy you with all this stuff you have to do, but remember, keep doing a little bit at a time. When the weekend comes, use your weekends productively. Don't let anybody take you away. Spend your waking hours doing your best work on your paper. Don't wait until every night you come home tired from work and all that stuff. That's not going to work. And whatever you do, do not wait until a few days before to start answering all your questions. even if you're successful, you're going to feel like you're drowning in any event. And God forbid, you might miss the boat. You start too late. All right. So please don't do that. All right. So I'll see you guys again next Wednesday, same time. We'll finish our final session and I'll be happy to answer any questions about any of the questions that you might have at the time. All right. So you guys take care and I shall see you next week.